As I mentioned on the lesson on Parshat Vayikra, the first two weekly readings, the first two Parshiot of the book of Vayikra, the book of Torah Kohanim, deal mostly with temple service. And of course, throughout most of our history, there was no practical application of any of these laws. Once the second temple was destroyed, close to 2,000 years ago, there was no more bringing of karbanot. And one might think then, what are the moral lessons that could be learned from this Parshiot? And the answer is there are a lot of various lessons, sometimes ethical lessons that can be learned. All kinds of explanations are given that even from relatively unimportant, one might think relatively unimportant paragraphs of the Torah, some ideas can be learned on practical level. That's besides that, of course, every parsha can have all kinds of Kabbalistic, mystical secrets and all kinds of other explanations. But I'm only discussing right now the simple lessons that one can see. So I'm going to discuss one paragraph in the beginning of our Parshat Tzav. It's actually a paragraph that most Orthodox Jews read every day in the morning. It's known that in the morning prayers, the first section deals with temple service because in certain sense, the prayers are a kind of substitution, a compensation for the fact that we cannot today bring the actual karbanot. The truth of the matter is, of course, the prayers were always important and existed even when the temple did stand. They're not really instead of the karbanot. But at any rate, at least part of the morning prayers include some of the passages from the temple service. And one such passage that got included is actually the beginning of our Parsha. Tzav Tzav means to command. Command the Jewish people. In this particular case, actually, Aaron and his descendants, like the priests. And there are a few interesting lessons that I learned from this paragraph. First of all, this paragraph talks about the mitzvah of what's called Trumat Hadeshen, removing the ashes from the altar. Every day in the morning, in the early morning, the Kohanim would choose someone to come and take out the ashes and later change his clothing and bring it outside of the temple, of the Chutz leMachaneh, as the Torah calls it, outside of the camp. So a few moral lessons that can be learned from this are as follows. First of all, the idea of being meek and humble. There was this very important Mussar work. Mussar means ethics, I guess, in English. There are a lot of categories of Jewish books that people learn. Of course, there's the biblical commentaries, there is oral law, Talmud, there is practical halachic works like Shulchan Aruch and commentaries, and there is a whole section, a separate group of works which mostly concentrates on making people better. In a way, if we were to discuss which commandments are fulfilled in which works, most of Shulchan Aruch, most of the practical Jewish law that is codified by Rabbi Yosef Karo, a sage who lived 500 years ago in northern Israel, what's called Tzfat, the city of Tzfat, Safed in English. So that Shulchan Aruch includes all kinds of laws that are mostly ritual laws. How to pray, how to keep Shabbat, how to make sure that the food is kosher, how to write a Sefer Torah, the laws prohibiting interest, taking interest, what's considered interest, the laws between men and women, marriage, divorce, ketubah, the laws of mourning are part of Shulchan Aruch, the laws of business dealings, of how to pay for damage, how to distribute inheritance, all these types of laws. They're all practical laws that apply to us today. And yet there is almost no section that deals with a lot of the more ethical types of laws. Like how to fulfill the mitzvah of loving somebody like yourself. How to fulfill that mitzvah? I guess the Shulchan Aruch decided that, the author of Shulchan Aruch decided that his main purpose is to explain the ritual laws that are more complex and they're not intuitive. One wouldn't know how to keep Shabbat simply, okay, let me rest. I'm going to rest on Shabbat. How do you rest on Shabbat? What's considered a melacha? Some things that are forbidden on Shabbat are very easy to do, like turning on a light, or lighting a candle, or carrying something outside. On the other hand, some of the things that are very difficult to do would not be considered melacha, like moving a very heavy table that requires 10 people to pick up. Let's say there is a table in the kitchen that you want to move to the living room and it's very heavy. That's not melacha. So my point is that the ritual laws are explained very well in Shulchan Aruch, but he almost does not deal with the more ethical, spiritual laws that are not that are much more intuitive, that are not so much the rituals, but rather the laws that a lot of people would come up with themselves. So the Shulchan Aruch left it basically for the people to decide, but that doesn't mean there are no laws there to discuss. But a lot of it is more like influencing people not to do it. Maybe that's the reason why Shulchan Aruch doesn't really discuss in great detail the laws of Lashon Hara, gossiping. It's forbidden to gossip. There are a lot of specific laws for this. But maybe the author mainly relied on the fact that most people are supposed to know and understand. You don't want to do to others what you wouldn't want them to do to you. So discussing badly, saying bad things about others is usually included in this this prohibition and the general law of loving others like yourself. So my point is that these types of laws are all in the domain of Mussar works. And also there are a lot of course, laws about loving Hashem and fearing Hashem that are also part of Mussar. So I guess if one were to connect to the specific commandments, while the laws of Shulchan Aruch deal mostly with the laws that are ritual, the laws or the ideas behind the books of Mussar is how to love Hashem and how to love other people. So mainly ethical works, ethical ideas are discussed there. So what's the most important early work of Mussar? It was written about 1,000 years ago, almost, by someone named Rabbi Bachya ibn Pakuda. So this great sage wrote a book that he called Duties of the Hearts, Chovot HaLevavot. And he divided it into various separate chapters, separate whole sections, separate sharim, what he called gates of. And of course, a lot of the examples he gives might not be very applicable today. He used, for instance, the examples from the science that was contemporary to him, and many other things that today don't really speak to us. But the ideas he gave, a lot of it, he gave a kind of trampoline of sorts for other Mussar works. Sometimes you might hear somebody, let's say Rav Amnon Yitzchak in Israel, speak, and he may give a kind of mashal, a kind of parable that actually is taken from Chovot HaLevavot, but using a little bit different the setting, the more something that applies better to us today, speaks to us today. The ideas he gave, he was a very wise sage, and the ideas he gave a kind of trampoline for other Mussar works. At any rate, the Chovot HaLevavot brings our parsha, actually. He learns a moral lesson. He says that a person should never be haughty, should be very meek and humble. And Aaron, who was the greatest priest, right, high priest, and very respected, and wore all these beautiful clothes and everything, of course, it may lead to gaiva, to kind of pride. So therefore, by taking out the garbage, basically, by taking out garbage every day, starting the day by taking out the garbage, that makes a person meek and humble. So that's one moral lesson. Another moral lesson, notice, by the way, that the sages explain that they used to be at first, that they thought that waking up very early, they had to wake up when it's still dark, basically, at the end of at nighttime, before even the dawn starts, in order to do this Trumat Hadesh and to take out the ashes. So the sages thought that it's not going to be a lot of competition among priests for this. Who is interested in taking out the ashes? Not such an honorable job like the other temple service. So at first they didn't even want to make a kind of the distribution, a decision based on some random choice, something that they used to call pious. They used to do this in the temple to decide who is going to do what work, meaning they would like say a certain big number and then count the let's say the fingers that each priest extends until they get to the last number, and that's the person who's going to be chosen. So it's kind of lottery in English. So they thought that you don't need lottery for this. This is not a kind of job to wake up early just to take out the garbage that so many people will be interested. But turned out it's not true. A lot of people were interested, and then they had to even make a pious for that as well. They had to make a lottery for who is going to take out the garbage, basically. But the priests in general, the Kohanim, were very zrizim. They were very energetic to do their work. Whatever the case may be, though, that's one moral lesson. Another moral lesson is, as they say, don't use the same clothes in which you take out garbage as in which you're going to serve your master. Right? So the Torah specifically says that the priest had to change his clothes in order to take out this chutz lemachaneh, outside of the camp, to take out these ashes. He had to change his clothes. So again, a nice moral lesson that it's not the same clothes you use to take out garbage as the clothes you use to serve Hashem. In general, they learn that mido ke midato, the midah, what they call the I guess in this case, of course, it means clothing, but the general meaning of this word means a kind of measurement of sorts. So the priests had to wear clothing that fits them, not something that's too short or too long, dragging on the floor and things like that. But there is also a general hint in this idea that a person's clothing is sometimes hitting to his midot, his spiritual qualities. Spiritual qualities are also called midot. And in a way, our qualities surround us like the clothing surrounds our body. In the spiritual sense, we could say that we're clothed in our qualities, in our spiritual qualities, ethical qualities. So a person has to always work on his qualities, his or her qualities. Very important point, right? If a person sees that his qualities are not right, not following the right pattern, he has to push himself. Like one person knows that he is very prone to anger, for instance. He has to be then very soft on everything and learn not to react whenever anything that might be disturbing or might be angering him. Only then he could get to the middle point of being a person who is right, the golden middle. This idea that the Greeks, of course, promoted, but there are similar ideas in among our sages. That Rambam, of course, emphasizes it. I don't think he took it just from the Greeks. There are some Jewish sources for this in the Talmud, and the idea is that if a person will be too soft on everything, that's also not good. But in general, anger is a bad quality. Let's say azut panim, terrible quality of being perky, being chutzpahdik. But does it mean that you should never use somewhat boldness? Of course not. Sometimes a person has to be bold. In particular, a lot of the Baalei Teshuva, people who weren't born religious, when they're becoming religious, their family, their friends turn against them and try to dissuade them. So you have to be bold. In a way, this quality is needed. Right? That's why it says to be bold as a leopard. One of the 4 qualities that Pirkei Avot suggests. But at the same time, generally, azut panim is a bad thing. Being too bold, too perky is a terrible thing. Az panim legehinom. The same sage who said be bold as a leopard, he said also that the person who's too bold will get into hell, gehinom. So there is a balance in everything, and the person has to always watch his qualities that surround him, in the sense that in the same way as a person watches his clothing from getting dirty and makes sure that they're clean. So these are just some of the interesting ideas based on our parsha, without even going into any secrets. There's, by the way, a small letter in our parsha, very rare thing. There are only a few small letters in the entire Torah. Right? The Torah doesn't have capital letters. All the letters are the same. But there are a few letters in the entire Torah scroll that are written smaller than usual. And this is one of them, Mogdah, Mem and Mogdah. Again, I'm not going to go into the suggestions of why this letter might be small, but it certainly hints to something. It's not for nothing that this Masorah, this tradition, is that one letter is written small in the entire Parshat Tzav. There's only one such letter, and it's in Parsha in the beginning of the Parsha, as I said, in the Trumat Hadeshen Parsha. And there are a lot of other great ideas that can be learned from this. I just gave a few examples, whatever came to my head right now. And if you like this video, please press like and please subscribe to our channel.